Coming to you live from Chatterbox Studios in downtown Memphis, it's Stephen Kirkpatrick with Executive Speakers on Speakers. I've got Daniel Sieberg on the phone with me from Google. We're going to be talking presidential election, this crazy thing called virtual reality, and what to do if your wife has a cooler job than you do. So stick around, we're going to have some fun, and you may just learn something. I'm very fortunate to have as our guest Daniel Sieberg. Daniel is the author of The Digital Diet and head of training and development with the Google News Labs. He works at the mothership of Google in New York. He's also the official spokesperson of Google. Daniel, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Stephen. Thanks so much. You mentioned Google and the book. And prior to that, I was a technology reporter for many years. So you could definitely call me sort of a news tech geek in the best sense of the word. I'm a big news junkie and I love technology, but when managed the right way. So some combination of all those things. Good to be with you.
Awesome. Well, listen, let's jump into this because you talked about being a tech junkie, and your book is called The Digital Diet, which is all about having boundaries in our technology usage. I mean, that just doesn't seem to fit, Daniel. So, I mean, you're gonna have to explain to me how this concept came about and how you're, basically at Google, you're pushing technology on people, and now you're saying, well, we need to be careful about that.
Yeah, it's funny on the surface of it. It definitely seems somehow sort of contradictory or flies in the face of what Google espouses. What I would say is that at a high level, I always say, love your technology, just not unconditionally. So I think it sort of gives people permission to say, hey, look, I love getting new phones. I love being on different social media platforms. I'm an early adopter. And I say that's awesome. And if you don't feel any sort of slightly negative impact on your life because of the way that you consume and use technology, then you're off and running. But I feel like there are parallels when you use the word diet. There are parallels to food. So we make choices with food. We consume different foods. We all have different metabolisms. We have different lifestyles. And I think the same is true with our consumption of technology in that, some of us have families that demand our time and we don't have the opportunity to sort of be in front of our screens. From a health and wellness standpoint, you always want to remember to get some exercise, get outside, just appreciate our environments. And sometimes the pull of technology can make us forget the value of that. And I think just from a professional business standpoint too, there are a lot of businesses, including Google, that think about the most effective way to communicate with people. You don't want to feel like you're constantly buried in email. You don't want to feel like you're, not responding in a way that is respectful to somebody's time. You want to manage your own time well. I think that there are just so many applications for thinking about this. And, it might surprise people to know that there are a good number of folks at Google who think about this sort of thing, whether it's for their own life or how we design our products or how we encourage people to try to find that balance. Google's, we're an 18-year-old company now. So that's somewhat mature in this sort of, world that we see of tech startups and in Silicon Valley. And so a lot of the employees have children now, and they've got their own sort of needs and things that they have to manage outside of work. So it affects, I think, a lot of people in different ways, whether you work at a tech company or not. But hopefully people can, it's a very customizable, personal sort of thing for people. It's not one size fits all. So I think that there's an opportunity to have both this embracing of technology, but then also not forgetting about the value of everything else.
I think that's really well said because I think it's something too, especially as we see more new technologies come out, really just kind of having a buffer of just some good questions to ask yourself as far as, hey, what is healthy consumption of technology? How am I, not negatively affecting the relationships that are important to me and things like that. So obviously in the book, you talk about some good questions to ask yourself and some practical tips. Do you want to share a couple of those with us?
Yeah, for sure. So it does vary, of course, depending on your own life and so on. But I would say a couple of them. One is I really encourage people to not charge their smartphone in the bedroom. This from you could come at this from a number of different directions. One being marital relations. I feel like this is one that my wife sort of, let's say, forced on me in that it's such a distraction. I think it's almost kind of like not having a TV in the bedroom in some ways, in that it's so easy for both partners to just slip off into their devices and not talk to each other. Then also on the other side of it, the distraction and that blue screen, it really has been shown to be detrimental to people's sleep and just the ability to fall asleep and get a restful sleep. And that when you wake up in the morning, it's not the first thing that you look at, that you can, like, I don't know, walk out of your bedroom and have a cup of coffee before you sort of dive into everything. And I think that the second one, I think, is to really, I mentioned the love your technology, but not unconditionally. I think it's okay to have some boundaries, and especially when it comes to work. So if you're on vacation, for example, and you put in your out of office message that you're not available from such and such date to whenever, really adhering to that as best you can so that people get that you really aren't available. Otherwise, it's very slippery slope when you start responding and people feel like you kind of are accessible, but not really. They don't feel like you're totally out. And I think people would be surprised to know that even at a company like Google, where people get a vast amount of email, maybe some of the highest volumes of email at any company, right? When I've seen people who go on vacation, put their out of office message up, and the out of office message not only says I'm out for these dates and I'm not checking my email, it says, and when I get back, I am going to delete all of the emails that I got while I was on vacation, and I'm not going to read them. So if you really want to get in touch with me, set a reminder to resend that email when I come back. And it kind of flips the script a bit, right? It puts the onus on the person who's sending the message rather than sticking the poor vacationer in mail jail the minute they get back to the office.
That's good. I mean, and I think it's one of the things too, where that really kind of gives, I think, people on both sides kind of an ownership of, creating this digital world that we live in, and kind of having those boundaries and being a good neighbor to someone, that, allowing someone to be out of the office, allowing someone to be on vacation, respecting those boundaries. I mean, I think that's a really, really good point. I want to kind of change lanes on you here a little bit. One of your signature keynotes obviously is Tech Life 2020, and people can find out more about that as well as your other speaking materials at our website, executivespeakers.com/Daniel Sieberg. So virtual reality, from what I have read, seems like it has a major disruptive capability or possibility that it's there. Where you sit and, coming down the pike, do you see virtual reality as being kind of the next biggest disruptor of technological life and things like that?
Yeah, I think so. A couple of things from our team's point of view as the Google News Lab, and we work with publishers and broadcasters and try to empower them from a storytelling editorial point of view. And, we've seen a good number of them over the past, let's say, 6 months, really start to experiment and adopt VR. And by VR, I mean everything from 360-degree photos and video right over to the sort of more game engine-y programming stuff. But that there is an opportunity to engage with an audience in a new way, and often through empathy. So putting somebody in a situation or from a point of view that they wouldn't otherwise be able to experience. An example of that, we worked with The Guardian in the UK on a project called 6x9, and this was all about putting somebody in a solitary confinement experience and really what that's like. And regardless of sort of your opinion about it, just trying to recreate that experience in a very meaningful and impactful way. And they produce the content. We just sort of help them with a little bit of funding and so on, but and some creative consulting with our engineering team. But they, I think, really nailed the potential for something like that. Now that's for news. I think for brands, I think for other companies, I think for their verticals, there's still, certainly lots of open questions, but I also think tons of opportunity. At Google, we just announced the new VR device for people to consume it called Daydream for $79, which is a pretty reasonable price point for people. So there's the creation of it that I think that is a challenge for anybody in some cases getting into it, although there's a whole spectrum of ways to do it. And then there's the consumption of it and the distribution and how that gets out to people when you choose to look at it? What's the tipping point for anyone to feel like, oh, I've got to go see that latest VR experience, right? And if you're not a gamer, what is it for people that's the value?
So do you think it's going to be something in the future at some point? Obviously, everyone has a smartphone now. Not everyone, but I would say vast majority of people have a smartphone. That someone's going to have some kind of virtual reality thing like a Daydream or something like that. I mean, do you see it being that big, or do you think it's be more specialized?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I feel like, you could kind of go two directions with this. On the one hand, the more sort of immersive headsets like a Daydream or Oculus Rift or Samsung Gear, they do provide this very, stereoscopic 360 kind of view. You can look around. You really feel like you're in a space. It's amazing. I've done some virtual reality experiences where I just felt like I was transported somewhere. We have something called Tilt Brush from Google, which allows you to virtually paint in space and see it around. I mean, it's really, it's mind blowing. However, on the other hand, the sort of instinct to carry around that device, and in public, I think everybody now has their VR face, where you're going, whoa, your mouth is open and you kind of look a little silly. So socially, it's not totally acceptable, right? And it's just not a part of people's routine like having a smartphone is. That is a part of the strategy with Google, is that the viewer, Daydream, the viewer still uses your smartphone as the screen, which is different than some experiences, like with the Oculus Rift, for example, which requires kind of a more intensive PC to power the experience. But so there's got to be a convenience to it and an amazing immersive part of it. And somehow those don't totally align right now for some people. But I think as the technology gets better, and as it's kind of hard to believe, but 10, 15 years ago, people had kind of written VR off. I mean, certainly for the short term, that people felt you're too sick, or you're just nauseated and disoriented, and there wasn't a lot of great content. And it's really only been in the past couple of years that it's had this resurgence. So in terms of where we're at with development of it, I would argue that we're at the brick phone stage, and that we have a long way to go with where it could be.
Gotcha. Very cool. So let's talk about this. I know you recently did a speech for the Minnesota Hospital Association. You've spoken at a lot of healthcare organizations and hospital associations. And one of the big questions out there with healthcare organizations, hospital associations, is the blending of kind of technology and medicine. Because obviously medicine in healthcare has a lot to do with the patient-surgeon interaction, and obviously technology makes it more machine-patient interaction. Talk to me a little about some of the things that you see coming down the line as far as technology, and how surgeons and doctors can use that to enhance patient experience and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think to play off the VR one, I think there's a lot of potential for that. There have been cases where a patient who was immersed in a virtual reality game and was a burn victim and was being treated for the very painful treatment for them. Reported less pain sensation during the treatment because of this very immersive distraction that they had through virtual reality, which is pretty cool. There are lots of ways to think about it from an educational standpoint, to put somebody from the point of view of a surgeon and allowing them to see and to train people on different techniques. So that's one area that I think is certainly applicable. There's a lot being done these days with, of course, there's a whole other area around managing people's data and using that data in a way that's responsible and respectful to help with diagnosis, and machine learning that can help to, in a sort of more timely way, potentially sort of help to diagnose what somebody has through looking at, this whole history of data that, you can put in some symptoms and kind of get a sense for what's going on with somebody. I think remote medicine, the opportunity to be in touch with your practitioner and your doctor through a video chat or through email or through texts or through a website, all of this, it's taken a while for us to get to a point where I think for many people that the broader medical world feels like it's caught up to some of the consumer devices and technologies that are out there. Certainly that's what I hear from a number of different doctors and administrative folks. But this is very much the state of technology in the medical space in the U.S. is one thing. There are whole other challenges in other parts of the world where it's not nearly at that stage that maybe technology could play a role in some ways, even just to have access and so on to information, which is something that we as a search company at Google think about. If you do a search, for example, for Zika virus right now, you get a little knowledge panel, a knowledge graph as we call it. A knowledge panel pops up and gives you some information about it. So if we know that a lot of people turn, I'm just as guilty. You turn to Google, you think you've got the flu or something, and you're putting in different symptoms. How can we surface information, quality information, in a way that helps you to understand your own, health and wellness? So, yeah, a lot of exciting technologies in that area.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, I think one of the things too, just talking about Google and putting stuff in, do you see this as something that could help kind of emerging nations with their healthcare and kind of seeing more of a collaborative effort potentially?
I think there's potentially some work there. A number of years ago, we had something called the Flu Trends, Google Flu Trends, and it also looked at dengue fever in places like India, where people were searching for different symptoms, and we were trying to share that information with people who are creating vaccines, and to be able to get that out early so that they could spot some of these trends where they were happening. That project has sort of shifted away from doing that in a really big manner, but I think there's definitely an opportunity to tackle some of those bigger challenges. I mean, I've heard from even vaccines. I heard from a group in Canada that's trying to put together a hackathon around virtual reality. And the premise of it would be to create an experience for people in developing countries to understand what goes into a vaccine. Because evidently there's just often a lot of confusion, a lot of misinformation around, what's in the vaccine, how is it created, am I going to get this disease, all that stuff that prevents them from having it. And so if they could put somebody, if a virtual reality experience was the right answer, that they could use that to kind of get into seeing how it gets created and kind of put aside some of the preconceptions and so on.
Very nice. So Daniel, your wife works at Spotify, correct?
That is correct.
So did y'all meet at like a Google Spotify mixer or something? I mean, like how does that happen?
Well, so she has a way cooler job. You should talk to her sometime. She has a way cooler job than I do. No, I have a pretty cool job, but she does get to hang out with artists and musicians, and I'll ask her what she's doing, and she'll say, "Oh, Demi Lovato's here warming up," because they've got a little studio space in the Spotify office in New York.
Name drop, Demi Lovato, Kanye.
Yeah,
Kanye's over here just hanging out.
No big deal. Just going to an after party with Sting and some friends. And I mean, it's but she's been in that space. So we met at CNN. We both worked at CNN.com a long time ago, back in 2000, 2001. And yeah, she's always been in the music space in some way. She was a music correspondent for a while, interviewed bands, musicians, and then made the leap to Spotify a few years ago to talk about trends. She gets to sort of see the bands that are trending, as people put together their playlists and they're searching for different artists. The team at Spotify can pull that data out and say, hey, look, in Sweden, this really cool band is becoming popular here. We can share that out with our broader audience and see if people in the US want to hear it, or Canada, or, so it's kind of neat to see how they can share that data about music and tastes.
Very cool. So the reason why I bring it up, another one of your speech topics, which people may find a little interesting for you, is talking about today's smart traveler and talking about what their expectations are. And obviously we're sitting here, it's October, you got last minute Christmas vacations and you got spring break, and people are going to start, ramping up for summer vacations, especially with family. So, talk to me about some of those things. If you're a travel agency, if you're a cruise line, I mean, like, what are some of those expectations that today's smart traveler has?
Yeah, so that's I love talking about that, because personally, I just travel a lot, partly for my job and in the past, and I think I've been to something like 60 countries, but I do try to bring the family when I can. It's sometimes a little challenging, as you know, with little kids, but yeah, I think it's everything from discovering those kinds of places where you go through something like Google Maps, and tapping into all of the shared reviews. And, one thing that I often will use is even like a Street View, right? Which is through, if you're planning to stay at a hotel, this is something that my wife and I have done in the past. If you're planning to stay at a hotel and you do have kids and you got strollers and all kinds of stuff, you probably want to know if the front entrance of the hotel has a bunch of stairs. And this is just one of those sort of practical things, right? So you can go on and through Street View just know a bit about what the street looks like and like, oh, okay, there's a ramp there or it's street level, or, just these kinds of tips that I think are useful and that where technology can play a role. Everything from the right way to share photos from your trip to being aware of what's around you, and even from a digital diet point of view, just kind of ensuring that you don't have your smartphone between you and every museum that you see on a trip, that you can kind of see it in real life. But yeah, I think the sort of like informed smart traveler and giving people some practical tips on that stuff. I love talking about that because it's very, I feel like it applies to so many people, whether you're traveling domestically or internationally.
Very cool. All right, Daniel, got to talk about the presidential election, man. I know you have been all over the place at the Democratic debates, at the Republican debates. You're at the first debate. So, I mean, what interest does Google have in the presidential debate? I mean, talk to me about this.
Sure. So at a high level, we really want to see the fostering of a healthy democracy. We have a lot of people, of course, turn to Google to find out information about the candidates, about the issues. We really want to surface that information in a way that's relevant and accurate for people, no matter what your political beliefs or allegiances are. We really want to be a part of that conversation. I think we are sort of anyway, so we want to do it in a way that makes sense more publicly. So we've been at the debates, as you say, going back to the primaries. We were at the conventions. We share a lot of our Google Trends data. So this is looking at what people are searching for, again, around a candidate or around an issue. But then also, I think what's really cool, and we actually saw this, during the debates, even in the past, couple of weeks, is that people will use Google search almost as their own fact check. So as they hear a candidate either make an accusation or claim something, they can turn to search and look it up for themselves. And we actually spot those moments. We can see when that's happening. We'll publicize that and say, here were the sort of fact-checking moments that were taking place. And I think that's interesting hopefully that's interesting to voters, to media, but then also to the campaigns to say, you know what, when you said X thing, like people were a little skeptical or people wanted to know if that was true. So I think there's an audience, a lot of different audiences for this stuff. But it's been, I was at Google even 4 years ago when we were doing a slightly different, slightly smaller version of all of this and going to the debates. And, as somebody who grew up in Canada but has become a U.S. citizen and lived here for 16 years, I really feel quite humbled and lucky to have this kind of front row seat with everything that's been going on. And I know for some people, election feels like it's been going on for 10 years, but it's pretty cool to be able to see history in the making.
Awesome. Now, you've been covering presidential elections and technology ever since your days at CNN. I mean, talk to me a little bit how you have seen technology's use in presidential elections change over that time period.
Yeah. So, I mean, even before that, if we start back with, sort of radio and television and what they did to sort of disrupt what the, voter experience was like and how they related to candidates and what they could sort of understand or know about them. Back in 2000, it was about, candidates had websites, right? Which it feels so antiquated to talk about this stuff, but there really was not a place where people could easily go to see everything that a candidate stood for, and not in a way that you could sort of do on your own time. Maybe you had, pamphlets, or you had something mailed to you, or but it was very analog, of course, before more people were on the web. Then there was the big surge in social media. We saw that in 2004 and then in 2008, and the candidates are increasingly thinking about ways to be strategic with email marketing and ways to get out the vote and to post. I mean, I think we've seen that during this cycle, there's a real-time conversation going on social media, particularly on a place like Twitter, where there's a back and forth between, either candidates and at all levels of government too, not just at the national level. but it's become, very much a part of how any politician on any level reaches out to their constituents. I think that the jury is still out a little bit on the effectiveness of that. Does that really, move the needle in terms of getting more voters and so on? I think that there is still a little debate in terms of how much that makes a difference. But it is not going away anytime soon. That's for sure.
Very cool. All right, Daniel, it's the time of the show where all of our listeners tune in just for this. You get an opportunity to see how smart you are. It's time to play 3 random questions. So how this is going to work, I'm going to ask you 3 random questions. You get to answer all 3. If you get 3 out of 3, you will be the first person to ever get 3 out of 3 on our show. So, a lot riding on this.
I have a question first, though, before you ask the questions. Am I allowed to use Google?
No, you cannot use Google, Daniel. Come on.
Okay.
Hey,
okay.
Digital diet, just got to put it away, okay? All right?
All right.
Okay, so since you're from Canada, we got 3 questions about Canada. I feel like that was only appropriate. Okay, question number 1. Who was Canada's first prime minister? Was it A, Sir John Alexander Macdonald, B, Sir John Cabot, or C, Samuel de Champlain?
I would probably be ridiculed by all my friends in Canada if I don't get this right, but the answer is A, Sir John A. Macdonald.
Very good. That is correct. That is correct. All right, question number 2. So as we all know, Canada has 10 provinces. Which one of these provinces was founded first? Was it Alberta or British Columbia?
Oh, boy, down to those 2?
Yeah.
Huh. Which one was founded first as a province? I want to say, so I'm from British Columbia, so I probably should know this.
You should.
I want to say British Columbia.
Oh,
just because
very good.
of settlers coming to the West Coast. Oh, is that right?
That is right. That is correct.
Oh,
Okay.
Yes,
your parents will not be ashamed of you. That's good. British Columbia was founded in 1871. Alberta, I was a little surprised to find this out, was not official province until 1905. Did not know that.
Okay.
Did not know that.
All right.
All right, number 3.
Yeah.
What is a more important national treasure for Canada? The Montreal Canadiens or the Toronto Maple Leafs?
And there's a right answer here?
There's always a right answer, Daniel.
It really depends on if you're asking somebody from Ontario or Quebec or somebody from the West Coast who would say the answer is neither.
Oh, look at that! It was a trick question. It's the Vancouver Canucks was actually the answer.
Right.
So there you go. Bob, was that 3 out of 3? I think that was 3 out of 3. Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, we have made history today on our podcast. Daniel Sieberg has gone 3 for 3 with 3 random questions. Daniel, listen, I hope that you treat yourself to a nice dinner tonight because you deserve it.
I will have an extra helping of maple syrup.
There you go. There you go. That's good. Everyone, that's all the time we have. I want to sincerely thank my guest, Daniel Sieberg. It's been delightful. www.executivespeakers.com/Daniel Sieberg for video, for speech topics, as well as a link where you can buy his book, Digital Diet. You can also go on danielsieberg.com to buy the book, Digital Diet, as well. Daniel, thanks so much for being on the show, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Hey, it was my pleasure, Stephen. Thank you so much. And I will say thank you and merci beaucoup, just as trying to be bilingual Canadian here.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. Take care.
All right, you too.
Hey, just want to say a special thanks to everyone for listening to us today. Special thanks to Chatterbox Audio Theater and Bob Arnold for giving us this wonderful location to record and host our show. Also, thanks to Ryan Sheeler for the music provided, and a big thank you to Daniel Sieberg. Again, you can find more information about him at www.executivespeakers.com/Daniel Sieberg. Speech topics, bio, as well as any video that he has. Look forward to talking to y'all again next month. Take care. This is Stephen Kirkpatrick for Executive Speakers on Speakers, signing off.